The freight wagon lurched violently before tipping sideways into the ravine, and Willa Harper watched in horror from the stagecoach as everything she owned in this world tumbled down the rocky slope in a cascade of splintering wood and scattered belongings. "Dear God," breathed the woman sitting beside her, pressing a gloved hand to her mouth. The stagecoach driver had pulled the horses to a halt the moment the freight wagon ahead had veered off the narrow mountain pass. Now passengers were climbing out, peering down at the wreckage below where the freight company's wagon lay broken like a child's toy, contents strewn across the rocks and brush. Willa's hands trembled as she descended from the coach, her traveling dress catching on the step. She was 22 years old, had sold everything back in Philadelphia to start fresh in Fort Worth, Texas, and now watched as her entire future disappeared into that ravine. The trunks containing her mother's china, her late grandmother's quilts, the few dresses she owned, her books, her teaching supplies for the schoolhouse position waiting for her, all of it gone. "Madam, I'm awful sorry," the freight company driver said, limping toward her with blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. His partner lay unconscious on the rocks below. "The wheel just gave out. Nothing I could do." Willa stared at him, unable to form words. She had $17 to her name, no family, and had been counting on those belongings to set up her life in Texas. The teaching position in Fort Worth came with room and board, but she needed her clothes, her books, her personal items. How could she start over with nothing? "We need to keep moving," the stagecoach driver announced grimly. "Storm's coming in, and we're still 2 days from Fort Worth. Can't risk getting caught in these mountains." "But my things." Willa finally found her voice. "Freight company will compensate you, miss. You can file a claim when we reach town." The driver's tone was sympathetic but firm. "Right now, we need to go." 2 other passengers helped the injured freight driver into the coach while a third climbed down to check on the unconscious man. Willa stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. A white petticoat fluttered in the breeze, caught on a juniper branch. One of her trunks had split open, spilling its contents like entrails. "Miss Harper, please," urged the woman who had been sitting beside her. "We truly must go." Numbly, Willa returned to the coach. As they pulled away, she pressed her face to the window, watching until the ravine disappeared from view. Everything was gone. Everything. The storm hit that evening with a vengeance, forcing them to take shelter at a tiny trading post nestled in a mountain valley. The structure was little more than a log cabin with a stable, run by a grizzled old man who eyed their group with suspicion until the stagecoach driver paid him silver for the night's lodging. Willa sat in the corner of the main room, still wearing her traveling dress, now dusty and creased. She had no nightclothes to change into, no brush for her hair, no warm shawl against the mountain chill seeping through the walls. The other passengers had their luggage from the stagecoach's roof rack, but Willa had trusted the freight company with everything except her small reticule containing her money and documents. "You should eat something," said the woman from the coach, bringing her a tin plate of beans and cornbread. Her name was Mrs. Thornton. She had explained earlier, traveling to meet her daughter in Fort Worth. "Thank you." Willa accepted the plate but could barely taste the food. Her mind kept circling the same thought. What would she do? The trading post owner, a man called Silas, sat by the fire whittling. "Saw the freight wagon wreckage," he said without looking up. "You folks are lucky. That pass has claimed more than cargo over the years." "There's a man hurt down there," Willa said quietly. "The driver's partner already sent word to the nearest mountain settlement," Silas replied. "There's folk up here who know these mountains better than their own kin. They'll find him, get him help." Willa nodded, though the information brought little comfort. She excused herself early and lay down on the hard wooden bench Silas had indicated was hers for the night, using her folded shawl as a pillow. Through the gaps in the log walls she could see snow beginning to fall. In June, the mountains were unforgiving. Sleep came fitfully, and Willa woke to voices before dawn. She sat up disoriented and saw Silas talking with a man near the door. The stranger was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. He wore buckskin clothing and a heavy coat, his hair dark and hanging past his collar, his jaw covered with several days' worth of beard. Even from across the dim room, Willa could see the raw power in his frame, the thick muscles of his arms evident despite his layers of clothing. "Found him about an hour past dawn yesterday," the stranger was saying, his voice a deep rumble. "Took him down to the mining camp. Doc says he'll live. But his legs broke bad." "The folks from the freight wagon," Silas asked, "already moved on. Stagecoach went through yesterday morning. We got delayed by the storm. They're here now, sleeping." The stranger's eyes swept the room, passing over the sleeping passengers before landing on Willa. She quickly looked away, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "That the woman who lost her belongings?" the stranger asked, his voice lower now. "Aye. Lost everything when the wagon went over, heading to Fort Worth to teach school." Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks. She did not need to be discussed like some charity case. She stood, intending to step outside for privacy, but the stranger moved into the room, bringing with him the scent of pine and woods smoke. "Madam," he said, pulling off a worn hat, "name's Gideon Stone. I pulled your freight driver's partner out of that ravine. While I was down there, I collected what I could of your belongings." Willa's breath caught. "You what?" "Wasn't much that survived the fall intact," Gideon continued, his dark eyes meeting hers directly. "But I gathered what seemed salvageable. Got it stored at my cabin about 5 miles north of here. Figured you might want to go through it, see if anything's worth keeping." Willa struggled to process this information. "Why would you do that?" Something shifted in Gideon's expression, a flicker of emotion quickly hidden. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "If you want to come take a look before your stage moves on, I can take you up. We'd need to leave soon, though. I'm guessing your driver will want to head out by mid-morning at the latest." Mrs. Thornton had woken and was watching the exchange with interest. The stagecoach driver emerged from the back room, overhearing the conversation. "We pull out in 2 hours," he said to Willa. "If you want to go with this man, that's your choice, but we won't wait. Next stage through won't be for a week, maybe more with the mountain passes the way they are." Willa's mind raced. 5 miles to this stranger's cabin and back would take at least 3 hours, maybe more. If she went, she would miss the stage and be stranded in these mountains for a week with no belongings, no proper shelter, dependent on the charity of others. But if there was any chance of recovering even some of her possessions, her mother's china, her grandmother's quilts, "Anything, I'll go," she heard herself say. Mrs. Thornton gasped. "Miss Harper, you cannot be serious. You don't know this man. He saved a man's life and took the time to collect my belongings when he had no obligation to do so," Willa said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I trust that he means me no harm." She looked at Gideon. "I will need to stay at the trading post until the next stage comes through. Will Mr. Silas accommodate me?" Silas scratched his beard. "Can do, but it'll cost you. I can pay." Willa touched her reticule, calculating how much of her precious $17 she could afford to spend. "Won't charge you," Gideon interjected. "She can stay at my cabin. I've got a spare room and my sister visits regular enough to keep things proper." "Absolutely not." Mrs. Thornton stood, her face flushed. "Young lady, I cannot allow you to." "Mrs. Thornton, I appreciate your concern, but the decision is mine to make." Willa turned back to Gideon. "Your offer is generous, Mr. Stone. I accept." The stagecoach driver shrugged. "Your funeral, miss. We're leaving in 2 hours with or without you. I understand." Gideon studied her for a long moment, and Willa had the unsettling feeling he could see right through her brave facade to the terrified woman beneath. But all he said was, "Best get some food in you before we head out. It's a rough trail." Willa ate quickly while Gideon spoke with Silas in low tones. Mrs. Thornton tried several more times to dissuade her, but Willa remained firm. When the stagecoach pulled away 2 hours later, Willa stood beside Gideon Stone's horse, a massive bay gelding, and watched her last connection to safety disappear around the bend. "You're either very brave or very foolish," Gideon observed, swinging up into the saddle with easy grace. He extended his hand down to her. "Haven't decided which yet." "Neither have I," Willa admitted, taking his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip strong as he pulled her up behind him as though she weighed nothing. "But I couldn't leave without trying to recover my things." "Hold on tight," was all he said before urging the horse forward. Willa wrapped her arms around Gideon's waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath his coat. The horse moved at a steady pace up a trail that seemed invisible to Willa's eyes, winding through pine forests and across rocky slopes where patches of snow still clung to the shadows. The morning air was crisp and cold, and Willa was grateful for Gideon's bulk shielding her from the worst of the wind. They rode in silence for nearly an hour before the trees opened up, and Willa saw the cabin. It was larger than she had expected, a solid log structure with a stone chimney, situated in a small meadow beside a rushing creek. A well-built stable stood nearby, and she could see a vegetable garden plot, still brown from winter but recently turned. Gideon dismounted first, then helped Willa down. Her legs were unsteady after the long ride, and she stumbled. His hands caught her waist, steadying her. "Takes some getting used to," he said, releasing her once she found her balance. "Come on, I'll show you what I recovered." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a table and chairs, a few shelves lined with supplies and books, and two doors leading to what Willa assumed were sleeping quarters. Gideon led her to a corner where he had carefully arranged the items he had collected. Willa's heart sank. There was so little: a few books, water-damaged but possibly salvageable, some kitchen items, a dented pot, several wooden spoons, a tin cup, a handful of garments, all torn or stained. And there, miraculously intact, wrapped in what looked like Gideon's own spare blanket, was her mother's china tea set. She fell to her knees beside the tea set, tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. The delicate cups and saucer, the teapot with its hand-painted roses they had survived. Her mother had carried this set from England when she married, had served tea from it every Sunday afternoon, had promised it to Willa on her deathbed. "I wrapped that one careful," Gideon said quietly from behind her. "Seemed important. It was my mother's." Willa's voice cracked. "She died 3 years ago. This is all I have left of her." She felt more than saw Gideon move away, giving her privacy for her grief. Willa allowed herself a few minutes to cry, then forced herself to compose and examine the other items. The books might dry out properly if treated right. The clothes were beyond saving, except perhaps for fabric scraps. The kitchen items were serviceable, but it was such a pittance compared to what she had lost. "I'm sorry there wasn't more," Gideon said. He had moved to the fireplace and was building up the fire. "The wagon broke apart pretty bad. A lot scattered down the ravine where I couldn't reach safely. You risked your life to save a stranger and took the time to collect what you could of my belongings," Willa said, wiping her eyes and standing. "I cannot thank you enough for what you've done, Mr. Stone." "Gideon," he corrected, "and you're welcome." He paused, his back still to her, as he adjusted a log. "I know it's not much, but you're welcome to stay here until the next stage comes. I meant what I said about my sister. She lives about 10 miles south with her husband. She comes by regular to check on me. You'll be safe here." "I don't want to impose. You're not." He finally turned to face her. In the better light of the cabin, Willa could see his features more clearly. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 at most, with strong, angular features and eyes so dark they were almost black. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a dangerous look, but his expression was gentle. "Truth is, I could use some company. Gets quiet up here." "What do you do up here?" Willa asked, curious despite herself. "Trap, mostly. Hunt. I've got a deal with some of the mining camps. I keep them supplied with fresh meat and furs for trade. It's a simple life, but it suits me." He moved to the shelves and began pulling down items. "You hungry? I've got venison stew from yesterday." Willa realized she was starving. "That would be wonderful, thank you." As Gideon prepared food, Willa took in more details of the cabin. Everything was well organized and practical, but there were touches that surprised her: a carved wooden bear on the mantel, beautifully detailed. Several books on the shelves, including poetry. A fiddle hanging on the wall. "Do you play?" she asked, gesturing to the instrument. "Some my father taught me before he passed." Gideon ladled stew into wooden bowls. He always said a man should have music in his life, even up in the mountains. They ate at the table, and Willa found herself relaxing, despite the strangeness of her situation. Gideon asked about her teaching position in Fort Worth, and she explained that the town was growing rapidly and needed educated women to teach the children. He told her about the mountains, about the harsh winters and brief summers, about the wildlife and the few other people who lived this far from civilization. "Don't you get lonely?" Willa asked. Gideon was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I came up here after the war. Needed the quiet, the space. Down in the towns there were too many people, too much noise, too many memories." His jaw tightened. "Up here, it's just me and the mountain and the sky. I can breathe." Willa understood. After her mother died, she had felt suffocated in Philadelphia, surrounded by people and their pitying looks. That was part of why she had sold everything and decided to come west to escape, to start fresh where no one knew her story. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "The war was terrible." "It was." Gideon stood abruptly, collecting their bowls. "You should rest. You can take the back bedroom. I'll sleep out here." "I couldn't possibly take your bed. It's not a discussion." His tone was firm but not unkind. "You're my guest. The bed is yours." Too tired to argue further, Willa accepted. The back bedroom was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in thick furs and wool blankets. She lay down fully clothed, intending to rest for just a few minutes. but exhaustion claimed her, and she slept deeply for the first time since the accident. When she woke, the light slanting through the small window told her it was late afternoon. She emerged from the bedroom to find Gideon gone, but the fire was burning strong and there was fresh bread on the table beside a jar of honey and a pot of what smelled like coffee. A note in rough handwriting read, "Out checking traps. Back by dark. Make yourself at home." Willa sat at the table, eating bread and honey, feeling strangely at peace. Through the window she could see the meadow and forest beyond, so different from the cramped streets of Philadelphia. The silence was profound, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant rush of the creek. She spent the afternoon carefully examining each item Gideon had recovered, cleaning what could be cleaned, setting the books near the fire to dry slowly. The tea set she handled with extreme care, washing each piece and arranging it on the shelf where it caught the light. When Gideon returned as the sun was setting, he was carrying a brace of rabbits and wore a pleased expression that faded when he saw the tea set on display. "Looks nice there," he said, hanging up his coat. "Thank you for giving it a place of honor." Willa felt suddenly shy. "I hope you don't mind. I've been organizing things." "Mind? This cabin hasn't been this organized since my sister was here last month." He held up the rabbits. "Fresh meat for supper. You ever cook rabbit?" "I'm afraid my cooking skills are limited," Willa admitted. "My mother tried to teach me, but I was always more interested in books than kitchen work." Gideon's laugh was unexpected, a deep, warm sound that transformed his serious face. "Well, you're in luck. I'm a fair hand at cooking. Have to be, living up here alone." He proved true to his word, preparing the rabbits with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. While he worked, Willa set the table and tried to make herself useful. They fell into an easy conversation about books Gideon had read widely, teaching himself during long winter months, and Willa found herself genuinely enjoying his company. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Gideon would leave early to check his trap lines, and Willa would spend the mornings cleaning the cabin, preparing simple meals, and working on salvaging her water-damaged books. Afternoons, Gideon would teach her about mountain life, how to identify animal tracks, which plants were edible, how to read the weather in the clouds. Evenings, they would talk by the fire, sharing stories from their pasts. Willa learned that Gideon had grown up in Virginia, the son of a farmer. He had fought for the Confederacy, though he clearly had complicated feelings about it. After the war, unable to return to a farm that no longer existed and a family mostly dead, he had drifted west, eventually finding these mountains and the solitude he craved. "My sister found me 3 years ago," he told Willa one evening as they sat by the fire. "She married a good man, a rancher down in the valley. They wanted me to come live with them, help work the ranch. But I couldn't." He stared into the flames. "I tried for a few weeks, but being around that many people, hearing the sounds of ranch work, the cattle, it brought everything back. The war, the screaming, the dying." "So you came back up here," Willa said gently. "Yeah. Sarah, my sister, she understood. She makes sure I don't go completely wild, comes up to check on me regular, brings me supplies, news from the outside world. It's enough." But there was something in his voice that made Willa wonder if it really was enough, or if Gideon was simply telling himself that to make the isolation bearable. As for Willa, she found herself sharing things she had never told anyone: how lonely she had been after her mother's death, how her father had died when she was just a child, how she had worked as a seamstress to save money for teaching school, how she had felt invisible in Philadelphia, just another poor woman struggling to survive. "You're not invisible," Gideon said quietly. "I see you." The way he said it made Willa's heart skip. She looked at him across the firelight and saw something in his eyes that both thrilled and frightened her. This mountain man, this stranger who had shown her such kindness, was becoming something more. On the 4th day, Gideon's sister Sarah arrived on horseback, bringing supplies and news. She was a petite woman with Gideon's dark eyes and a warm smile, and she embraced her brother with obvious affection before turning to Willa with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the teacher," Sarah said, looking Willa up and down. "Gideon sent word through one of the trappers that you were staying here. I wanted to meet you." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hayes," Willa said. "Please call me Sarah. Mrs. Hayes makes me sound like an old woman, and I'm only 26. She glanced between Willa and Gideon, and something knowing sparked in her eyes. "Well now, this is interesting." "Sarah," Gideon warned. "What?" "I'm just making an observation." Sarah winked at Willa. "My brother doesn't usually invite people to stay at his hermit cabin. You must be special." Willa felt her cheeks heat. "He was kind enough to help me when I lost everything." Sarah began unpacking her saddlebags. I brought you some clothes, Willa. Figured you could use them since Gideon mentioned the accident. There's some of my old dresses from before I married. We're about the same size, I think. Tears pricked Willa's eyes. That's incredibly generous. It's nothing. Lord knows I don't need them anymore. Sarah pulled out 3 dresses, 2 petticoats, a nightgown, stockings, and a warm shawl. There, now you don't have to wear the same dress for a week. The kindness overwhelmed Willa. First Gideon, now his sister. These people owed her nothing. Yet they gave so freely. Sarah stayed for lunch, regaling them with stories from the valley and catching Gideon up on family news. Before she left, she pulled Willa aside. He's a good man, Sarah said quietly. The war hurt him bad, changed him. But I see something in his eyes when he looks at you that I haven't seen in years. Hope, maybe. Or happiness. Don't break his heart, Willa Harper. I would never. Willa started, but Sarah was already mounting her horse. See you next week, Gideon, Sarah called. Take care of our teacher. After Sarah left, Gideon seemed quieter than usual. He busied himself with chores, while Willa tried on the dresses Sarah had brought. They fit reasonably well, and the relief of having clean clothes to change into was immense. That evening, Gideon took down his fiddle for the first time since Willa had arrived. He played beautifully slow, mournful melodies that spoke of longing and loss. Willa sat listening, her hands folded in her lap, deeply moved. That was beautiful, she said when he finally lowered the instrument. My father's favorite song, Gideon replied. He'd play it every evening after supper. Said it helped him remember what he was working for: family, home, love. Do you think about those things? Willa asked. Family, home, love. Gideon looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Lately, I have been. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Willa knew she should look away, should maintain proper distance, but she could not. There was something about this man, his quiet strength, his gentleness despite his size and obvious capability for violence, his kindness that drew her like nothing she had ever experienced. Willa, Gideon said, his voice rough, I need to tell you something. But before he could continue, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Multiple horses. Gideon was on his feet instantly, his whole demeanor changing. He grabbed a rifle from above the door and moved to the window. Stay back, he ordered Willa, his voice now hard and commanding. Willa's heart pounded as she heard men's voices calling out. Gideon opened the door, rifle ready, and Willa saw 4 men on horseback in the meadow. They looked rough, their clothes dirty and their faces unshaven. Help you, gentlemen? Gideon called out, his stance relaxed but ready. Looking for the pass south, one of the men said. He was older than the others, with a scar across his cheek. Heard there's a mountain man up here who knows these trails. You heard right. Pass is 5 miles east of here, follows the ridgeline. Gideon's voice was calm but firm. You'll want to take it before dark. Weather's turning. The scarred man's eyes moved past Gideon to the cabin, and Willa saw his expression change when he spotted her through the window. Didn't realize you had company. Pretty company at that. My wife, Gideon said flatly, and we were just about to have supper, so if you gentlemen will excuse us. Willa's eyes widened at the lie, but she had the sense to stay silent. The scarred man studied Gideon for a long moment, taking in his size, the rifle held with obvious competence, the hard set of his jaw. Much obliged for the directions, he finally said. We'll be moving along. They watched until the men disappeared into the trees. Only then did Gideon lower the rifle and close the door. I apologize for the lie, he said, turning to Willa, but men like that traveling without women, looking rough, they can get ideas. Better they think you're married and protected. I understand. Willa's voice shook slightly. Do you think they'll come back? No, they were drifters, maybe miners looking for new claims. But I'll sleep out here tonight, just to be safe. And Willa? He met her eyes. If anyone asks, you tell them you're my wife. It's the only thing that will keep you safe out here. That night, Willa lay awake in the bedroom, very aware that Gideon was just beyond the door. The incident with the drifters had shaken her, made her realize how vulnerable she was in these mountains. But it had also shown her another side of Gideon: protective, commanding, dangerous when needed. She felt safer with him than she had felt with anyone in her life. The next morning brought news that would change everything. A trapper stopped by, a grizzled old man named Dutch who traded information and gossip along with his furs. Stage came through yesterday, Dutch told them over coffee. Got held up by bandits on the South Pass. No one killed, but they took everything of value. Stage company is suspending service through these mountains until they can get better security. Willa felt the blood drain from her face. For how long? Dutch shrugged. Could be weeks, could be months. Bandit's been getting bold lately. After Dutch left, Willa sat at the table, trying to process this information. Her teaching position started in 2 months. She needed to get to Fort Worth, needed to establish herself, needed to— You're welcome to stay here, Gideon said quietly. For as long as you need. I can't possibly impose for weeks or months. It's not an imposition. He sat across from her, his large hands wrapped around his coffee cup. Willa, I need to be honest with you. These past few days having you here, it's been good. Really good. I didn't realize how lonely I was until I had company. Your company. Willa looked into his dark eyes and saw raw honesty there. I've felt it too, she admitted. This peace, this simplicity. I haven't been this content in years, then stay. At least until the stages are running again. Sarah comes by regular, so propriety is maintained. You can help me with the cabin, I can teach you mountain skills, and maybe— He paused, seeming to gather courage. Maybe we can see where this goes, this thing between us. You feel it too? Willa whispered. From the moment you agreed to ride up here with a complete stranger, trusting me on nothing but faith. Gideon reached across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Willa placed her hand in his. His palm engulfed hers, warm and calloused and strong. I know it's fast. I know it's crazy, but I can't deny what I'm feeling. Willa's heart raced. But Gideon, I have a position waiting in Fort Worth. A future I've planned for, I know. And when the time comes, if you want to go, I won't stop you. But until then, stay with me. Let's see what this is. It was madness. Willa knew it was madness. She barely knew this man. She should be desperate to get to civilization, to the safety and structure of town life. But looking at Gideon, feeling the warmth of his hand, remembering the peace she had felt these past days, she could not bring herself to refuse. All right, she said. I'll stay. The smile that broke across Gideon's face transformed him. For a moment, the hardness from the war, the isolation of mountain living, all fell away, and Willa saw the man he must have been before life carved him down to essentials. Over the following weeks, Willa fell into the rhythm of mountain life. She learned to cook over the open fire, making venison stew and cornbread, wild berry pies and roasted rabbit. Gideon taught her to fish in the creek, laughing when she squealed the first time she caught a trout. He showed her how to identify edible plants, how to track deer, how to read the weather and the wind. But it was the evenings Willa treasured most. They would sit by the fire, Gideon playing his fiddle while Willa read aloud from books or told stories from her life back east. Sometimes they would simply talk for hours about everything and nothing, philosophy and poetry, dreams and regrets, small moments from their days. And slowly, carefully, they grew closer, a hand held while walking beside the creek. Gideon's arm around Willa's shoulders when she shivered in the evening chill. A moment when their eyes met across the fire and something electric passed between them. Sarah visited twice more, each time staying longer, and Willa could see the approval in her eyes as she watched her brother and Willa together. On her third visit, she brought her husband Thomas, a solid, practical man who clearly adored his wife. Gideon tells me you're quite the student, Thomas said to Willa as they all sat down to supper, learning to live off the land. Your brother-in-law is an excellent teacher, Willa replied, smiling at Gideon. He's good at a lot of things, Sarah said meaningfully. Loyal, protective, honest to a fault, Sarah, Gideon warned, his ears turning red. What? I'm just stating facts, Sarah grinned at Willa. He's also stubborn as a mule and too proud for his own good, but nobody's perfect. Thomas laughed. You'd know, being married to someone equally stubborn. They spent a pleasant evening together, and before Sarah and Thomas left the next morning, Sarah pulled Willa into a tight hug. He loves you, she whispered. He hasn't said it yet because he's terrified you'll leave, but he loves you. I can see it in everything he does. Willa held Sarah tighter, blinking back tears. I love him too, then tell him. Life's too short for unsaid words. That night, Willa stood at the window of the bedroom, watching moonlight paint the meadow silver. She heard Gideon moving in the main room, banking the fire for the night. Her heart pounded as she made a decision. She opened the bedroom door. Gideon looked up from where he was spreading his bedroll, surprise crossing his features. Willa? Is everything all right? I need to tell you something. She stepped into the room, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. These weeks here with you have been the happiest of my life. You've given me so much safety, kindness, laughter. You've replaced everything I lost and given me so much more. But the most precious thing you've given me is yourself. Gideon stood slowly, his dark eyes locked on hers. Willa, I love you, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I know it's fast. I know it might seem impossible, but I love you, Gideon Stone, and I needed you to know." For a moment, Gideon simply stared at her. Then he crossed the room in 3 long strides and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God help me, I've loved you since you trusted me enough to ride up that mountain. You brought light back into my life, Willa. You made me want to be more than just a man hiding in the wilderness." He kissed her then, and Willa felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. His lips were gentle despite his size and strength, asking rather than demanding. She wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid warmth of him, the barely leashed power in his frame. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know you have plans, a teaching position waiting, but marry me anyway. We'll figure out the rest together." "Yes," Willa whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They held each other in the firelight, 2 people who had been lost finding home in each other's arms. Later, much later, they spoke of practical matters. Willa would write to the school board in Fort Worth explaining her situation. Perhaps they could find a teaching position closer to the mountains, or perhaps Gideon would consider moving down to the valley to be near Sarah and Thomas. They had time to figure it out. What mattered now was this moment, this love, this future they would build together. Sarah was delighted when they told her the news on her next visit, immediately beginning to plan a wedding. "We'll have it at the ranch," she declared, "small but proper. And Willa, you need a proper wedding dress." "I don't need anything fancy," Willa protested. "Every bride needs a wedding dress," Sarah said firmly. "I have my mother's dress. It would fit you with minor alterations. Please, Willa, let me do this for you." For Gideon, the wedding was set for 6 weeks later, giving time for preparations and for word to spread to the few neighbors and friends scattered through the mountain communities. In those weeks, Willa and Gideon grew even closer, learning each other's habits and quirks, planning their future together. Gideon began working on an addition to the cabin, a proper second bedroom and a larger kitchen. "For when we have children," he said matter-of-factly, and Willa felt her heart swell at the thought. She wrote to the school board in Fort Worth, explaining that her circumstances had changed and she would not be taking the teaching position. It felt strange to let go of that long-planned future, but she felt no regret. Her future was here, with Gideon. One afternoon, about 2 weeks before the wedding, Gideon surprised her by presenting a large wooden crate. "What is this?" Willa asked. "Open it." Inside were dishes, not fine china like her mother's tea set, but sturdy, serviceable dishes for everyday use. Beneath them were linens, blankets, cooking pots, utensils, everything a household would need. "You lost everything when that freight wagon went over," Gideon said quietly. "I couldn't replace your mother's china or your grandmother's quilts. But I could replace everything else. I've been trading furs for months, working with the merchants in the valley towns. It's all for you, for us." Willa threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "You already replaced everything I lost," she said. "You gave me a home, a family, love. This is just," she laughed through her tears, "this is more than I could ever have dreamed of." The wedding took place on a clear summer day at Sarah and Thomas's ranch. About 20 people attended Sarah and Thomas, other ranchers from the valley, a few trappers and mountain men who knew Gideon. Dutch, the old trapper who had brought news of the stage suspension, served as one of the witnesses. Willa wore Sarah's mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her frame. It was simple but beautiful, cream-colored linen with delicate embroidery. Sarah had woven wildflowers into Willa's hair. When Willa walked out to where Gideon waited with the traveling preacher, she saw his eyes widen and fill with emotion. He looked magnificent in clean clothes, his hair trimmed, his beard neatly shaped. But it was the look on his face, awe and love and barely restrained emotion, that made Willa's knees weak. The ceremony was simple. They exchanged vows under the open sky, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon kissed her with a tenderness that belied his powerful frame, and the small gathering cheered. The celebration afterward was joyful and genuine. There was food and music, laughter and dancing. Gideon played his fiddle while Thomas called out dance steps, and Willa danced with him and with Dutch and with Thomas, breathless and happier than she had ever been. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Gideon and Willa prepared to return to their cabin. Sarah hugged them both fiercely. "Be happy," she whispered to Willa. "You both deserve it." The ride back to the cabin took several hours, but Willa did not mind. She sat in front of Gideon on the horse, his arms around her, feeling like she was exactly where she belonged. Happy, Mrs. Stone? Gideon murmured against her hair. Happier than I knew I could be, Willa replied. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and awed. Gideon was gentle with Willa, patient and loving, and when they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Willa felt a completeness she had never experienced. I love you, Gideon whispered. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret this, Willa said, tracing the scars on his chest, remnants of the war he rarely spoke of. You're my home, Gideon. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Willa threw herself into learning everything about mountain life, and Gideon was an enthusiastic teacher. She learned to shoot a rifle, to preserve meat and vegetables for winter, to identify medicinal herbs. She tended the garden with Gideon, weeded and watered, and harvested their first crops together. In the evenings they would sit outside the cabin and watch the stars emerge, talking about their days, their dreams, their plans. Gideon told her more about his time in the war, the nightmares that sometimes still woke him, the guilt he carried. Willa listened and held him and reminded him that he was a good man, that the past did not define him. In turn, Willa shared her own fears that she was not strong enough for mountain life, that she would fail as a wife, that she was not worthy of such happiness. And Gideon would pull her close and tell her she was the strongest person he knew, that she had transformed his life, that he was the lucky one. As autumn approached and the aspens began to turn gold, Willa realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. At first, she attributed it to the change in her life, the different food and activity. But as weeks passed and other signs appeared, nausea in the mornings, tenderness in her breasts, a bone-deep exhaustion, she began to suspect. She confided in Sarah during one of her visits, and Sarah's face lit up with joy. Oh, Willa, a baby! Have you told Gideon? Not yet. I wanted to be sure, and Willa bit her lip. I'm scared, Sarah. I know nothing about babies. My mother died before she could teach me. What if I'm not a good mother? You'll be wonderful, Sarah said firmly. And you have me. I've had 2 babies. Remember, I'll help you through everything. But Willa, you need to tell Gideon soon. He'll be over the moon. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Willa gathered her courage. Gideon, I have something to tell you. He looked up from the piece of wood he was whittling, immediately attentive. What is it? Are you all right? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. She took a deep breath. I'm with child. We're going to have a baby. The knife and wood clattered to the floor. Gideon stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and then pure, radiant joy. A baby? We're having a baby? Yes. Willa laughed at his stunned expression. In the spring, I think. Is this good news? Gideon was across the room in an instant, pulling her into his arms with careful tenderness. Good news, Willa. This is the best news I've ever received in my life. A baby. Our baby. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm going to be a father. You're going to be an amazing father, Willa said, touching his face. That night, they lay in bed talking about the future, names for the baby, how they would need to expand the cabin further. Whether it would be a boy or a girl, Gideon placed his large hand on Willa's still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. I never thought I'd have this, he said quietly. A wife, a child, a real home. After the war, I thought I was broken beyond repair. But you fixed me, Willa. You made me whole. We fixed each other, Willa corrected. I was lost too, remember? Alone and scared and running away from grief. We found each other exactly when we needed to. As winter approached, preparations began in earnest. Gideon worked tirelessly to finish the cabin expansion before the heavy snows came. Sarah and Thomas helped, as did several of the other mountain families who had become friends. The community was small but tight-knit, and everyone was excited about the coming baby. Dutch stopped by regularly with supplies and news, refusing payment. Consider it a baby gift, he said gruffly when Willa tried to insist. Mountain needs more young ones to keep it alive. The first heavy snow came in late November, blanketing everything in white silence. Willa stood at the window, marveling at the beauty, while Gideon stoked the fire. It's beautiful, she said. It's deadly, Gideon corrected gently. We'll be snowed in for months, Willa. Are you sure you're ready for that? She turned to look at him, this man who had become her entire world. As long as I'm with you, I'm ready for anything. The winter was long and harsh, but Willa found beauty in it. The cabin was warm and snug, well stocked with supplies. Gideon hunted when the weather permitted, and Willa cooked and preserved what he brought back. They played games in the evenings, read books aloud to each other, made love in the warmth of their bed while snow piled high outside. As Willa's belly grew, Gideon became even more protective. He would not let her do heavy work, insisted she rest frequently, worried constantly about her health. It was endearing and occasionally frustrating, but Willa understood the fear beneath it. Childbirth was dangerous, especially this far from a doctor. Sarah managed to visit twice during the winter, riding up on days when the weather cleared. She brought baby clothes she had sewn, advice, and reassurance. On her second visit, in late February, she examined Willa and pronounced everything healthy. "The baby's positioned well," Sarah said. "Strong heartbeat. You're doing everything right, Willa." "I'm terrified," Willa admitted. "Every woman is the first time. But you're strong and Gideon will be with you. And I'll be here when your time comes, I promise." Spring came late to the mountains, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing new green growth. The creek swelled with runoff, and wildflowers began to carpet the meadow. Willa, now heavily pregnant, spent her days preparing for the baby's arrival, washing tiny clothes, arranging the cradle Gideon had built. In early April, her pains began. Gideon immediately sent word to Sarah via a passing trapper, then settled in to wait with Willa. He held her hand through the contractions, wiped her face with cool cloths, murmured encouragement and love. Sarah arrived 6 hours later, bringing her experience and calm confidence. "You're doing wonderfully," she told Willa. "Just breathe through it. Your body knows what to do." The labor was long, nearly 20 hours, and painful, but Willa never felt alone. Gideon stayed by her side the entire time, his presence a steady anchor. And finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their daughter was born. She was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival with impressive volume. Gideon took her in his large, calloused hands with infinite gentleness, tears streaming down his face. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's perfect. Willa, you did it. You gave me a daughter." They named her Grace Rose Grace for the grace that had brought Willa and Gideon together. Rose for the roses on Willa's mother's china. The next months were exhausting and wonderful. Willa learned to navigate motherhood with Sarah's guidance and Gideon's unwavering support. He was a natural father, patient and gentle with Grace, singing her mountain songs and carrying her around the cabin while Willa rested. The mountain community embraced little Grace. Dutch brought her a carved wooden rabbit. Thomas and Sarah visited often, bringing their own children to play. Other families stopped by to meet the new baby, bringing gifts and congratulations. As Grace grew from infant to toddler, Willa watched Gideon blossom as a father. He was endlessly patient with their daughter, teaching her about plants and animals, carrying her on his broad shoulders, making her laugh with his silly faces. The haunted look that had been in his eyes when Willa first met him was completely gone, replaced by contentment and joy. "Do you ever regret it?" Gideon asked one evening as they sat outside watching Grace toddle around the meadow chasing butterflies. "Giving up your teaching position, staying in the mountains instead of going to Fort Worth?" Willa leaned against his shoulder, watching their daughter's joy. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I needed, Gideon. A home, a family, love, purpose. What more could I possibly want?" "I was thinking," Gideon said carefully. "There are families in these mountains, scattered around, children who need education. Maybe not a formal school, but you could teach them. Share your love of books and learning." Willa sat up, excited by the idea. "I could, couldn't I? We could hold classes here at the cabin during the summers when travel is easier. We could build a schoolroom," Gideon said, warming to the idea. "Nothing fancy, but enough space for maybe a dozen children. You'd be Teacher Stone of the mountain school." They began planning that very evening, and over the next year the dream became reality. Gideon built a schoolroom attached to the cabin, complete with benches, a blackboard, and shelves for books. Word spread through the mountain communities, and when the first school session began the following summer, 12 children arrived, eager to learn. Willa taught them reading and writing, arithmetic and history, all the while keeping Grace nearby. She discovered a deep satisfaction in shaping young minds, in passing on knowledge and love of learning. The mountain children were bright and eager, starved for education in this remote place. Gideon supported her fully, helping wrangle the younger children, using his hunting and tracking skills to teach outdoor lessons. Together, they created something special, a place of learning and community in the wilderness. 2 years after Grace was born, Willa gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel James, after Gideon's father. Sam was a sturdy boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Gideon doted on both his children, and Willa often found herself simply watching her family with wonder and gratitude. The mountain school thrived. More families sent their children, and Willa expanded the curriculum. She ordered books from the valley towns, using money from the small tuition fees families paid in trade goods or cash. The school became a hub for the mountain community, a place where families gathered and friendships formed. Sarah's children attended when they could make the journey, and Grace and Sam grew up surrounded by playmates and community. It was not the life Willa had envisioned when she left Philadelphia, but it was so much better. 5 years after the freight wagon accident, Willa stood in the meadow watching Gideon play with Grace and Sam, while a third child grew in her belly. The cabin had expanded into a proper homestead, with the schoolroom, additional bedrooms, a root cellar, and a barn for the horses and milk cow. She thought about that desperate young woman who had lost everything, who had trusted a stranger to take her up a mountain. That woman could never have imagined this life, this abundance of love and family and purpose. "Mama," Grace called, running toward her with Sam toddling behind. "Papa says we can go fishing at the creek. Will you come?" "Of course," Willa said, taking her daughter's hand. Gideon approached, sweeping Sam up onto his shoulders and reaching for Willa's free hand. "All right, family, let's catch our supper." As they walked toward the creek together, Willa glanced back at the homestead. On the porch, she could see her mother's china tea set displayed in the window, catching the afternoon light. It was the only thing she had recovered from the accident, the only physical link to her past. But everything else, everything that truly mattered, had been replaced by the mountain man she had married. He had given her a home, a purpose, a family, and a love deeper than any she had imagined possible. He had replaced not just her lost belongings, but her lost hope, her lost joy, her lost faith in the goodness of life. "What are you thinking about?" Gideon asked, squeezing her hand. "How that freight wagon losing all my belongings was the best thing that ever happened to me," Willa said. "Because it brought me to you." Gideon stopped walking and turned to face her, his free hand cupping her cheek. "I think about that too, about what a miracle it was that you trusted me that day, that you stayed, that you chose this life, chose me. I would choose you 1,000 times over," Willa said, "in any life, in any circumstance." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, while their children giggled and the mountain breeze whispered through the pines. In that moment, Willa felt the perfect rightness of her life. Every loss, every hardship, every moment of fear and uncertainty had led her here, to this man, this family, this home. That evening, after fishing and supper and tucking the children into bed, Willa and Gideon sat outside under the stars as they had done countless times before. Gideon's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too." Gideon pressed a kiss to her hair. "Thank you, Willa. For what? For trusting me, for staying, for giving me everything I never knew I needed. You saved my life as surely as I pulled that freight driver from the ravine. You brought me back to the world, back to living, back to hope." "We saved each other," Willa said, the same words she had spoken years before, and it was true. Two lost souls finding each other in the vastness of the mountains, building a life together from the ashes of what they had lost. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Willa gave birth to 2 more children, another daughter named Margaret and a son named William. The cabin became a true homestead, bustling with life and laughter. The mountain school grew, eventually requiring Willa to hire another teacher to help manage all the students. Gideon's trapping business expanded. He partnered with Thomas, supplying meat and furs to the growing valley towns. But he never lost his love for the mountains. He never considered moving to lower elevations despite the increasing prosperity. "This is our place," he would say, surveying their land. "Where we found each other, where we built our life. I'll never leave it." Willa felt the same. The mountains had become her home in a way Philadelphia never was. She loved the changing seasons, the community of hearty, independent families, the satisfaction of building something meaningful with her own hands. Sarah remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting regularly with her growing family. The bond between the sisters-in-law deepened into genuine friendship. Sarah's children and Willa's children grew up together, more like siblings than cousins. Dutch became an honorary grandfather to the Stone children, stopping by regularly with carved toys and tall tales. He taught the older children to track and trap, passing on his decades of mountain wisdom. The mountain community itself grew and evolved. New families arrived, drawn by the school and the promise of good land. A small church was built, served by a circuit preacher who made the rounds every few months. A general store opened in the nearest valley town, making supplies easier to obtain. Through it all, Willa and Gideon's love remained the foundation of everything. They had grown together, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, raised their children with care and devotion. The passion of their early days had evolved into something deeper, a partnership, a friendship, a love so integral to their beings that neither could imagine existence without the other. On their 10th anniversary, Gideon surprised Willa by taking her back to the meadow where he had first brought her after the freight wagon accident. The cabin had expanded far beyond its original footprint, but the essence remained the same. "Remember when you first saw this place?" Gideon asked as they stood in the evening light, watching their children play in the distance. "I was terrified," Willa admitted, and awed. "I had never seen anything so beautiful or so isolated. I could not imagine living here, and now I cannot imagine living anywhere else." Willa turned to face him. "You gave me the world, Gideon. You replaced everything I lost and gave me so much more. Love, family, purpose, belonging. You gave me myself." Gideon pulled a small package from his coat pocket. "I have something for you, an anniversary gift." Inside was a delicate locket on a gold chain. When Willa opened it, she found tiny portraits on one side, Gideon on the other, their 5 children. "So you always carry us with you," Gideon said softly. "Your family, the treasures that can never be lost." Willa's eyes filled with tears as he fastened the locket around her neck. "It's perfect. Thank you." "Thank you," Gideon replied. "For 10 years of happiness I never thought I deserved, for giving me reason to wake up every morning, for loving me despite everything I was, everything I'm not. You're everything I need," Willa said, "everything I could ever want. I love you." Gideon Stone. They kissed as the sun set over the mountains, casting everything in golden light. In the distance, their children's laughter rang out, pure and joyful. The cabin stood solid and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney. The school building waited for the next session of eager students. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built together from loss and trust and love. Years later, when Willa was an old woman with silver in her hair, and Gideon's beard was white as mountain snow, they would sit on the porch of their now sprawling homestead and watch their grandchildren play in the meadow. The original cabin was now the heart of a compound that included homes for their married children and their families. The mountain school still operated, now run by their daughter Margaret, who had inherited Willa's love of teaching. Grace had married a rancher from the valley and had 6 children of her own. Sam worked the trap lines with his father, already teaching his own sons the mountain ways. William had become a doctor, serving the scattered mountain communities. Their youngest daughter Emily had married a teacher and helped run the school with Margaret. "We built something good," Gideon said one evening, his hands still large and strong, despite his years wrapped around Willa's. "We built something wonderful," Willa corrected. "A family, a community, a legacy. All because a freight wagon lost a young woman's belongings," Gideon mused. "And a mountain man decided to help, all because I trusted you," Willa said. "All because you saw me and chose to care. Best decision I ever made," Gideon said. "Climbing down that ravine, gathering up what I could of your things, I told myself I was just being neighborly. But I think, even then, I knew you were special, that you were going to change my life. We changed each other's lives," Willa said. "We saved each other." As the sun set over the mountains they had called home for more than 50 years, Willa thought about the journey that had brought them here. The loss, the fear, the leap of faith, the slow building of trust and love, the family they had created together, the community they had helped build, the countless lives they had touched through teaching, through simple kindness, through being examples of what love could create. She thought about that young woman who had watched her belongings tumble into a ravine and thought her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell her the truth, that it was just beginning, that losing everything would lead her to gaining so much more than she could imagine. "What are you thinking about?" Gideon asked, the same question he had asked her countless times over the decades. "How blessed I am," Willa replied. "How grateful I am for every moment of this life we have built." "Me too," Gideon said, pulling her closer. "Me too." Their grandchildren's laughter echoed across the meadow as twilight descended. Inside the various cabins, lights began to glow warm and welcoming. The scent of cooking fires drifted on the evening breeze. Somewhere, one of their grandchildren was playing Gideon's old fiddle, the music's sweet and clear. This was their legacy, not just the physical structures or the land they had claimed and worked, but the love they had nurtured, the family they had raised, the community they had helped build. Everything they had created from that single moment of trust when a young woman accepted a mountain man's offer of help. Willa touched the locket she still wore after all these years, the portraits inside long faded but the meaning eternal. Gideon covered her hand with his, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. This was happiness. This was home. This was the happy ending neither of them had dared to dream of when they first met. Two broken people in the wilderness finding wholeness in each other, and it was perfect.